In a village surrounded by fertile fields and thick forests lived a man named Kofi and his wife, Amma. Their marriage had been blessed with many daughters, but Kofi's heart was heavy. He longed for a son, someone to inherit his lands, someone who could carry on his name. Every time his wife gave birth to a girl, the disappointment grew heavier in his chest. One cold evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Amma gave birth to another child. Kofi stood at the door of their hut, his arms crossed, his face hard with frustration. When he heard the wail of a newborn, his hopes were shattered. Another girl, he muttered under his breath, but the pain of it sank deep into his heart. Amma smiled weakly, her arms trembling as she held the tiny girl. "Her name is Aqua," she whispered, "the joy of our life." But Kofi's heart was filled with darkness. "She will never be what I wanted," he thought, as his eyes stared out into the darkened sky. The days passed slowly, and Kofi's resentment grew. He could not look at his daughter without feeling bitterness rising in his throat. The villagers praised Aqua's beauty, but to Kofi, she was just another reminder of his failure. He would walk away from her, spending more time in the fields, avoiding the very home he had worked so hard to build. Amma, on the other hand, cared for Aqua with all her heart. She would sing lullabies and tell stories of the stars to her daughter, not understanding the anger that clouded Kofi's spirit. She did not know that the land, the family, and the future that she cherished so deeply meant nothing to Kofi without a son to claim them. But despite the tension, there were moments when Aqua's laughter would break through the walls Kofi had built. She was so small, so innocent, yet the pride he longed for could never be hers. And that realization gnawed at him daily. The river that ran near the village had always been a place of mystery and power. It was said to be the home of ancient spirits, protectors of the land, and those who had been cast away by fate. Kofi had heard the whispers of old men telling tales of how the river could change lives, how it held the power to heal broken things. One hot afternoon, Kofi walked along the banks of the river, his feet stirring up the dust beneath him. He could no longer bear the shame of having a daughter instead of a son. He had heard that the river could cleanse the family of its misfortune. Maybe, just maybe, he could make things right. With a grim determination, Kofi decided that Aqua's future would be determined by the spirits. He would take her to the river and leave her there, believing that this sacrifice would bring him the son he so desperately wanted. It was a moonless night when Kofi took Aqua in his arms. His wife slept soundly, unaware of his actions. The village was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the soft croaking of frogs by the river. Kofi walked with purpose, his heart heavy, but convinced that he was doing the right thing. When he reached the river bank, he gazed into the swirling waters. The current seemed to beckon him, as if it had always known this moment would come. He looked down at Aqua's peaceful face, her tiny hands curled against his chest. With a bitter sigh, Kofi lowered his daughter to the water's edge. The river seemed to whisper in response to the infant's presence, but Kofi, lost in his own grief, didn't listen. He released her, watching as she was swept away into the darkness. The river, ancient and wise, did not claim Aqua as Kofi had expected. Instead, the waters, alive with the energy of unseen forces, cradled the child. Beneath the surface, the river spirits whispered in ancient tongues, their voices a soothing balm to the infant's fragile soul. The river knew no malice, only balance. It would not allow an innocent child to perish for the selfish desires of a father. The river, in its wisdom, decided that Aqua's life would not be taken in vain. A whirlpool formed around her, soft but powerful, and the water rose, enveloping her in a protective embrace. The river spirits imbued her with strength and resilience, watching over her as she slept beneath the moonlit waters. As the days passed, the villagers noticed that the river flowed more beautifully, the water sparkling with the strange light. They spoke of it in hushed tones, not understanding the change, but sensing that something powerful had stirred beneath the surface. As the seasons passed, Aqua grew not in the arms of her mother, but within the spirit world of the river. She learned the language of the waters, the songs of the ancient beings that dwelled there. The river spirits taught her about balance, wisdom, and the true nature of life. She was no longer just a girl abandoned. She was a part of something much greater. By the time she was 6 years old, Aqua was no longer just a child. She had become a spirit of the river herself, radiant and filled with ancient knowledge. The river spirits spoke of her destiny, a destiny that would change the lives of all who had wronged her. Back in the village, Kofi began to notice strange happenings. The crops, once bountiful, started to wither. The cattle grew thin and sickness spread through the village. But worse than this, his own heart began to ache with guilt, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like 1,000 stones. One evening, as he sat alone by the river, the whispers of the spirits reached his ears. They spoke not in words, but in the wind and the rustling of the leaves. Kofi shuddered as he realized that the very river he had cast his daughter into was now punishing him for his actions. In the depth of his sorrow, Kofi understood the truth. The river had not taken Aqua. It had protected her, and in doing so, had cursed him for his betrayal. Determined to find peace, Kofi returned to the river. It was late at night, and the moon hung high above, casting a pale light on the water. He knelt by the riverbank, his heart heavy with remorse, calling out to the spirits, asking for forgiveness. And then the water stirred. From the depths, a figure rose, Aqua, but no longer the helpless infant he had abandoned. She was radiant, her eyes filled with the wisdom of the river. Her form shimmered like the water itself, and her voice echoed in Kofi's mind. "Father," she spoke, her tone gentle yet firm, "I am no longer the child you cast away. I am the spirit of the river, and I have learned much." Kofi fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he begged, "forgive me. I was wrong. I only wanted a son, but I see now that I have lost so much." Aqua, now a being of the river, looked down at her father with compassion. "You have the chance to redeem yourself," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "But it will not be easy. You must prove your worth, not through your desire for a son, but through your love and respect for all life." Kofi's heart was torn. He had caused so much harm, but he was willing to do whatever it took to right his wrongs. He nodded solemnly, ready to face whatever task Aqua set before him. "Before you can be forgiven, you must show the world your true heart," Aqua continued. "I will return to the village, but you must prove that you no longer see a child's worth through the lens of gender. I will give you 3 tasks, and each will test the depth of your humility and understanding." Kofi, with a sense of resolve, whispered, "I am ready, my daughter. I will show the village and myself that I have learned." Kofi returned to his home, but it was not the same. The village seemed eerily quiet, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. His own family, once proud of him, now looked at him with disdain. The crops that had flourished under his leadership now withered in the fields. His sons, born to other women in the village, were indifferent to his struggles. Kofi walked to the center of the village, feeling the weight of every judgmental glance. His heart was heavy with the realization that his actions had not only harmed Aqua, but they had also damaged his own soul. As he stood there, the wind whispered Aqua's name in his ears. "You must make amends, father," she urged him, though her presence was invisible to the villagers. "Your first task is to restore the brokenness you've caused, to heal the wounds in your family." Kofi turned to his wife, Amma, who stood silently, her eyes filled with pain. He approached her and spoke with a voice filled with regret. "Amma, I have wronged you in ways I cannot express. I abandoned our daughter, and for that, I am truly sorry." Amma, her face etched with sorrow, did not respond immediately. She looked at Kofi, eyes searching, trying to find the man she once loved amidst the rubble of his actions. After a long moment, she spoke quietly. "Your words are empty without the actions to back them, Kofi." Aqua's voice resonated again, more strongly this time, as Kofi stood before his wife. "To redeem yourself, you must learn to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart." Kofi nodded, understanding now that words alone would not suffice. His first task was to rebuild trust, to show Amma that he was willing to walk alongside her as an equal, to carry the weight of their shared past together. He began by working with Amma in the fields, something he had not done in years. They worked side by side, planting new crops, repairing their home, and speaking of their dreams and fears. Slowly, the wall between them began to crumble, and Kofi realized that the act of hard labor, the shared responsibility, was what had been missing in their relationship all along. Through this simple act, Kofi began to understand the true meaning of partnership. He was no longer the man seeking dominance through pride and ownership. Instead, he was learning to support and respect Amma as his equal. As the days passed, Kofi's transformation became evident. He found himself at peace with the labor of the land and the people around him. He no longer felt the sting of resentment when he looked at his daughters, especially not when he saw how much he was beginning to value the lives he had once ignored. One evening, as Kofi sat by the river, his heart light with newfound humility, he saw the water stir. From the depths, Aqua emerged, no longer a spirit of vengeance, but a radiant being of the water, her eyes filled with understanding and forgiveness. Kofi stood, tears streaming down his face. "Aqua, I have learned what it means to truly live, to embrace every life, no matter its form." Aqua smiled, her presence enveloping him like a gentle wave. "You have done the work, father. You have shown your humility and love, not just for me, but for all life. The river forgives you, and so do I." Kofi dropped to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. "Thank you, my daughter. I see now that the legacy I sought was not one of ownership, but one of love and respect for all." Kofi stood by the riverbank, his heart pounding with anticipation. Aqua, now a radiant spirit of the water, gazed down at him with serene wisdom. "To earn forgiveness, you must give up that which you value most," she told him. Her voice, gentle as the river's current, filled him with a strange calm. Kofi's mind raced. He had given so much to his land, his family, and his name. The wealth, the respect. These were the things that had driven him for so long. He had built his life on them, and yet they had brought him nothing but pain. Was he truly ready to let them go? "I will give anything," Kofi said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will sacrifice whatever is needed to earn your forgiveness, my daughter." Aqua's eyes shone with the wisdom of the river. The greatest gift you can offer is to let go of your pride and accept the truth that love is what sustains us, not the legacy of men. The next day, Aqua appeared to Kofi in the village square, her presence invisible to everyone else. "Your first task," she said, "is to give freely without expecting anything in return." Kofi hesitated, but knew this was his moment to prove himself. They were poor villagers, those who struggled each day just to feed their families. Kofi had seen them, but he had always thought that they were beneath him, unworthy of his generosity. But now, with Aqua's words in his heart, he knew what he must do. He approached the poorest household, where an elderly woman and her 2 children lived in a dilapidated hut. Kofi, with all the wealth he had accumulated over the years, took a deep breath and entered the hut. He offered the woman his finest harvest, his best livestock, and a large sum of money to help her children. "Take this," he said, "for you and your children." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "You give this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kofi nodded. "I give because I can, and because I have learned that this is what matters." As the days turned to weeks, Kofi's efforts were beginning to restore some semblance of peace to the village. The crops slowly began to flourish, and the land started to feel alive again. Yet, Aqua's voice continued to guide him, and he knew there were more trials ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aqua appeared to him once again. "Your next task is to show true compassion," she said, her voice like a ripple across a still lake. "There is a woman in the village, one who has suffered greatly. She has known loss and pain. You must go to her, and not just give her what you think she needs, but show her that you understand her grief. Offer your heart." Kofi felt a heavy weight upon his chest. The woman Aqua spoke of was the widow, Nia, whose husband had died years ago in an accident. Nia had been left to raise 2 children on her own, but she had never fully healed from the loss. Kofi had always kept his distance from her, feeling uncomfortable with her sorrow. Yet now, with Aqua's words in his heart, he knew what he had to do. He gathered a basket of food and other supplies and walked to her home. Kofi stood outside Nia's home, the evening air cold around him. He could hear the faint sound of children's laughter inside, but the sadness lingered in the air. A heavy presence. With a deep breath, he knocked on her door. Nia opened it, her face weary but kind. She hadn't expected a visit from Kofi, especially not after everything that had happened between them. Kofi held out the basket, his hands trembling. "I've come to offer you this," he said softly, "but also to listen. I've wronged you in the past, and I'm sorry. I've learned that compassion is not just giving what's needed, but understanding the pain behind it." Nia stared at him, unsure of how to react. She had spent so many years alone, raising her children without help, without comfort. Kofi's words were unexpected, but they stirred something deep inside her. She motioned for him to sit. Over the next hour, Kofi sat and listened as Nia spoke of her lost husband, of the weight she had carried for so long. He did not interrupt, nor did he offer solutions. He simply listened. When she finished, her eyes were wet with tears, but for the first time in many years, she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't expect you to understand, but you do." As Kofi walked back from Nia's home, he reflected on the conversation. He had expected to offer material help, but Aqua's guidance had led him to something deeper. It was not what he could give that mattered, but how he could be present. True compassion was not solving someone's problems, but standing with them in their pain, understanding their heart. That night, as he sat by the fire, he felt a peace settle in his soul. The task was not easy, but it had opened his heart. Kofi realized that he had lived his life thinking of others in terms of what they could offer him, whether it was respect, wealth, or a male heir. Now, for the first time, he understood the value of simply being there for others, not for gain, but for love. Days passed, and Kofi continued his work in the village, showing compassion wherever he could. He found that each act of kindness filled him with a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. And yet, something still tugged at his heart. His daughter, Aqua, was still out there, a spirit of the river. He had learned much, but he wondered if he could ever truly make amends for the wrongs he had done. One evening, as Kofi sat by the riverbank, the water began to stir. Aqua appeared, radiant and serene. "Father," she spoke, her voice soft as the rippling waters. "You have completed the trials, and your heart is true. You have shown love, compassion, and humility. But there is one final test." Kofi's heart raced. "What is it, my daughter?" he asked, his voice filled with anxiety. "Forgiveness," she replied. "You must forgive yourself." Kofi had spent years consumed by guilt, believing that he could never atone for the wrongs he had done to his daughter. The pain of his actions had weighed heavily on him, and he had believed that no amount of good deeds could erase his betrayal. But now, Aqua stood before him, a living embodiment of the very forgiveness he sought. "Forgive yourself, father," she repeated. "You cannot change the past, but you can shape the future." Kofi's heart wavered. "But how can I forgive myself for abandoning you, for casting you away like that? How can I ever make that right?" Aqua smiled softly. "You have already done so much. You have shown kindness, love, and humility. It is not about erasing the past. It is about moving forward with an open heart. You must learn that forgiveness, both from others and from yourself, is the final step on the path to peace." Kofi wrestled with the words of his daughter. Could he really forgive himself for what he had done? Could he live with the memory of his actions and still find peace? As the days passed, Kofi continued his work in the village. He spoke with those he had wronged, and though they offered their forgiveness, it was the battle within himself that remained hardest to fight. Each time he thought of Aqua, his beautiful daughter, lost to the river, he was reminded of his own betrayal. But then, one evening, as he gazed out over the river, he felt a strange peace come over him. It was as if the waters themselves were cleansing his soul. Slowly, he began to understand that the act of forgiving himself was not about forgetting the past. It was about embracing the man he had become. One morning, as the sun rose over the river, Kofi stood by its banks, a sense of calm in his heart. He had come to terms with his past, and though the pain would never fully leave him, he had learned to carry it with grace. Aqua appeared before him, her presence more radiant than ever. "You have done it, Father," she said, her voice filled with love. "You have learned to forgive, not only others but yourself. The river has washed away your sorrow." Tears filled Kofi's eyes as he looked at his daughter. "Thank you, Aqua. You are the river's gift and my redemption." Years passed, and Kofi continued to live a life of humility and compassion. He taught his children the lessons he had learned, showing them that love, respect, and forgiveness were the true foundations of a family's legacy. Aqua, the daughter he had once cast away, was now a part of his life in a way he had never imagined. As he looked out over the river one last time, Kofi knew that the legacy he had feared losing had been found again. Not in a son, but in the love he shared with all his children, and in the peace he had finally made with his own heart.